2020 has been an unforgettable year for many reasons. Despite an abundance of negative or less favorable circumstances due to the pandemic, there's been some upside for adtech professionals. One notable trend has been an uptick in time available to get educated on programmatic media. Slowdowns in travel and new working from home norms have given many ad pros and marketers the time they need to add buying concepts, strategies, and new developments to their media education arsenal. Christine Kim oversees client education in the programmatic media space as the leader of Centro Certified, a curriculum-driven client education program and Ad Exchanger finalist for one of the best education programs in the industry. Christine and I get caught up on how things have been going, educating in a virtual world, priority topics and subject matter for ad tech professionals, and what media buyers should be doing to stay up to date in an industry that demands evergreen learning. This episode on AdTech education with Christine Kim starts right now. Christine, thank you so much for joining me today for this episode of AdTech Unfiltered to talk about AdTech education and how to stay on top of it.
Thanks, Nora. I'm so excited to be here to talk a bit about education and how we are working with it in the AdTech industry.
And for folks who likely don't know, a little bit of background about me and Christine. I actually have known Christine for a lot of my life. I met Christine in my teens. I was taking summer school classes, and now we've known each other for, I think, a little over 16 years. So there's a long relationship there. Now we actually work together, and she leads up client education. So knowing that we're in the pandemic, I want to start off and talk about the pandemic in context with ad tech education. So are you finding that people are still deeply committed to getting educated during this pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, going into the pandemic, when we had to turn our programs into a virtual one, personally, I was incredibly nervous that it wouldn't translate into a virtual environment. I wasn't sure if people wanted to do it. But what we found was that when we launched it at the beginning of the pandemic, the first one was in April where we converted it into a virtual experience. And we found that that class filled up so quickly and the engagement was so high. And so we released the rest of the schedule for the rest of the year. And we saw that people were still registering for them. People were very motivated to register for them. And I think it really is for two reasons. One is that people have a little bit more time on their hands because they're no longer commuting to work and they're all working from home. And second, I think people are finally motivated to do that education thing that they've been wanting to do, has been on their radar. And they're like, well, now is the time to do that. And what we've seen is that, ad spend halted in March when the pandemic first happened and when lockdowns were happening. Attendance was almost 100% for those classes. But as Q4 approaches and the lockdowns are being lifted, what we've been beginning to see is that users are becoming more busy in their day-to-day as clients are spending more. And we do see a slight drop-off in attendance due to workloads, but we are not seeing a drop-off in terms of people registering and their interest in virtual education.
So virtual education is a pretty big theme during this pandemic for many of the reasons that you just described, Christine, but specifically speaking to virtual education with consideration for the types of programs that you lead. You do a full-blown curriculum-based education. Have you specifically seen a rising popularity for that type of program structure in the ad tech space?
We have seen a rising popularity and interest in it. And I think part of it is, learning programmatic is not something that you learn once and forget about it. It often has a pretty big learning curve. So what we're finding is that, especially in the digital ad tech world, the industry is also changing all of the time. So something that you learned 6 months ago might not be relevant 6 months from now or even next week. So there is this constant need to stay updated on your education. And because things correlate with each other, you need to understand one thing in order to understand the next thing. So there needs to be a longer form of curriculum-based education when it comes to the ad tech world, just so that you're getting a more comprehensive understanding of what's going on. One thing always impacts another thing. So if you're not getting that, then you're not getting the full picture of programmatic. So it becomes difficult to go off into a fuller, deeper understanding of it.
I think you've already answered my next question by what you just described as far as the value associated with a comprehensive curriculum based education. I was going to say that we do live in this world that's focused on people who are looking for shortcuts, and oftentimes people are hoping to just Google something really quick, find an answer in an existing article or blog. Clearly that's not enough, right? Like it's not so easy to just go down the road of looking for a quick shortcut or looking for one-off answers. You do want everything to comprehensively build.
Yeah, we do. And I think it's so important to get context. So you can read an article, you can go on Reddit, you can go on the trades, but at the end of the day, if you don't have the bigger picture of what that article is talking about, you might get that information completely incorrect, which is the last thing you want. I also think there's a lot of value in learning from subject matter experts, which is what we provide in a lot of our education, is making sure that we are connecting you with somebody who has years of experience working in the ad tech world, working with clients. And if anything, I think the two things actually should be done in tandem. So as you're going through any type of curriculum based or longer form education content, coupling that with reading the trades, going through the Reddit forums, having conversations with your coworkers, just to make sure that you are fully understanding it. Because even if you are only going to classes, if you're not talking to other people about it, there's still an opportunity that you're missing out on something, or you're misunderstanding a component of something.
Yeah, and that sounds like that's another added benefit of the classroom format. You actually get to touch base with other folks. Like there are other types of virtual education out there, but they don't necessarily lend themselves to you being able to review and discuss with other people. So, some interesting points there. Here's another question for you. What's the end goal associated with completing a comprehensive programmatic media education program, knowing that it's a big commitment for somebody who decides to sign up?
Yeah, that's a great question. And anytime, we're putting together any type of curriculum, that's a question that our teams will ask ourselves, what is the point of someone going through this and what is the benefit that they're going to get out of it? I think something to consider is that, once you graduate college or any type of school, you think that you're done learning. But the reality of it is that in the ad tech world, you're never done learning, which is one of my favorite parts of working in ad tech. So I think it's really important for people to continue their education. And it's not like there's a next level up. Technically, you can go get your master's in it, but you're not necessarily applying directly what you learn. And the benefit of doing that through, a partner is that you'll be able to directly apply everything that you're learning. And not only that is usually it comes with some sort of badge or certification that you can apply, that you can add to your resume, and it becomes a form of career building that you're not getting anywhere else, and another form of experience that you can add to your skill set.
The learnings or the insights that you take away have deep application. And to your point, I mean, it's not just continuous education, like it is daily education, right? Like we need to be reading the latest and greatest every single day. And I think creating these kinds of programs really help people synthesize and think about everything they've been reviewing over the period of time that they've been committed to ad tech work in a really meaningful way. So I'm going to pivot the question in another direction to speak to some challenges you might face. What are unique challenges that you have to deal with when educating professionals on a topic like programmatic media buying?
Yeah, I would say that there are a lot of unique challenges when it comes to it. I think for one, adults learn a lot differently. And adults who are busy on top of that, who have a lot of things going on at home, especially during the pandemic. So one, I think, is capturing the attention of adults is something that is unique to not only actually programmatic media buying, but I would say in any type of adult education. But I also think there's this layer of complexity that comes into it because there's so many different levels of knowledge. So sometimes we get people coming into our classrooms that are maybe have a background or 15 years in print, or maybe they have 10 years of background in TV. So they definitely have an understanding of marketing and they understand objectives and KPIs. But then when we start getting into the nitty gritty of digital, that's where things become a little bit more complicated. And even someone who's coming straight from college is going to have a very different background and have a very different set of questions than someone else who has been working, technically in, let's say, the print industry for 10 years. So something I try to understand more of is, especially students, if I have people who actually just graduated from college attending any of our classes, if I'm able to kind of pull them to the side, one of my favorite things to do is to ask them what they've been learning in school or what they had been learning, just so I get an understanding of who is coming into this classroom, whether that be virtually or in person, of what their background is. So we need to understand what level of knowledge people are coming in at, just so that we are presenting the information in an appropriate way that's going to make the most sense.
I think this is an extension of that previous question as it speaks to unique challenges. How do you refine and enhance your programs? And how do you make sure that you're evolving these education programs to accommodate the evolving needs of buyers?
I think that's another great question, Noor. When it comes to evolving the programs, I really look at it in three ways. One is I'm also constantly keeping up with the trends and the trades. The reason I do that is because the last thing I want any student that comes through any programs that we run through Centro is to feel like they don't have enough exposure into the latest trends, because the last thing I want them to be is in a situation where they're having a conversation either with their managers or with their clients or whoever they need to be having these conversations with, and not feeling confident that they have the latest information, or not feeling confident that we didn't cover that for them. So I'm always taking a look at trends to see what needs to be incorporated into any of the programs that we're running. And second, I'm also taking a look at new features that are being released in our software. So as new features are released, I'm carefully monitoring and having conversations with our product team and our product marketing team on if that particular feature is going to change the behavior for the buyer. So if it does change the behavior for the buyer, that's a whole different set of training and information that we need to provide to the buyer and really kind of hash out for them. All right, this is why we need to change this. We're doing it for you. Here are the steps that you need to take to do this. So I'm taking a look at flow and function when it comes to the features of the software. And probably the most important part that we look at is feedback. So we are constantly looking for feedback from students who are attending any of our programs. So feedback can usually be shared with us through their customer success managers or through their central representative. We do also do surveys at the end of each of our programs, which we heavily promote because we do want that feedback directly from clients. Sometimes clients are comfortable enough to share that feedback directly with me, in an email or on a call. We do read through that feedback, make sure, look out for any themes. Is there anything that we are totally missing? And what can we directly apply to the next program that we run?
Now that you've been running a virtual ad tech education program for several months, what really separates this learning experience from the in-person one that you have been managing for a couple of years for Centro Certified?
Noor, one of the mistakes that I made actually when we were translating things into a virtual environment is I thought to myself, I need to give our customers the same exact experience that they would get in person. And what I quickly learned was that that was impossible. So what I did was I took a step back, took a look at the core components of what makes our program successful and what clients needed to know after completing the program, whether that be virtually or in person. And I went from there. And what I learned was that there are pros and cons to both. So when I think of the in-person experience, we're able to really curate that whole experience for our customers, which is actually one of my favorite things to do. So it's not just about what happens when I walk into the classroom. We're really looking at it from what is that registration process like? Is it easy for the client to register? Is it clear what the learning objectives and outcomes are? And then when they walk into the classroom, we're really thinking through the whole experience. What is their lunch going to be? What are the breaks going to be? Because we also understand that it's really hard for people to sit in a room for 2 entire days and consume content all day. I think the benefits of the in-person experience is that we are able to do that. We're able to have that face-to-face contact, keep the conversation flowing with clients. But the con of that is that because all of the information is presented in 2 days, the customers usually don't have a moment to take a step back and really think through how they're going to apply what they just learned to their campaigns. So I took that and tried to take advantage advantage of that in a virtual environment. So in the virtual environment, we lose some of that. We do still try to curate a positive experience for clients, but we try to now translate what can we do that people get in that 2-day experience. Now we can break it up over time. And then now we're only presenting 2 topics at a time. We're meeting with clients a couple times a week versus in that 2-day setting. So it gives clients the opportunity to take a step back and think through it, maybe talk to their coworkers about it. We do also utilize Zoom, and we put people into breakout rooms so people can talk about it. And it also gives people the experience to go through it virtually, especially if they were not able to come in person.
What are some of the most popular topics that people who have attended your education programs been most inclined to want to learn about?
Oh, yeah, this is a fun one because I feel like I'm always playing detective and trying to figure out what people want to learn about. So, if you've ever attended any of my programs, one of my favorite questions to ask clients is, what do you want to learn about? What more can we cover for you? And really, it's anywhere between understanding the differences between buying programmatically to direct buying to the demise of cookies and what that means for our industry. But I would say by far the most popular topic has always been optimizations. And I think part of it is because people are always doubting if they're doing their optimizations right or if there's something that they're totally missing. And I think, the answer is that there really isn't a secret sauce. And while it frustrates a lot of people who want those straightforward answers, we don't necessarily have them because optimizations are very unique to that particular campaign. And it's going to depend on so many factors like time of year, how long the campaign's been running, what their creative looks like, what their website looks like, what their goals are, what the flight dates are, what the budget is, what the geo is. So, you can throw a group full of buyers into a room with the same campaign to optimize. And when they walk out, they're all going to have very different ideas. So, that said, how we tend to approach a topic like optimizations is we try to give best practices and try to give enough scenarios of, okay, if your campaign has been running, retargeting for a year, here's some things that you can do to it, but really it's going to depend on how your campaign is reacting to those changes. And the beauty of programmatic is that you can see if something's working right away, so you can change it again.
Yeah, I feel like with education programs, you can set your clients up for success and do a lot of work to get them to a great place. But at some point, you have to let them free, set them free, and let them see how that can be applied on the unique business that they work on. So, how do you encourage people to continue educating themselves after they've become certified?
Yeah, that's so important for clients and for anyone that works in the ad tech world to keep yourself educated on the latest things. And, if you don't do that, then you have the risk of saying something that's incorrect because that's how fast this industry moves. So, what I generally recommend is I personally will give myself one time a week to catch up on the trades. So, I have everything emailed to me. I file all those emails away from Ad Exchanger or Digiday or all the ones I subscribe to. And I specifically will take about an hour to read through them at a certain day of the week. Right now, for me, it's falling on Friday mornings. And from there, I'll usually, if I have a question about it, I'll strike up a conversation with a coworker and send them the articles, see if they agree with, what this person is saying. And I think a lot of times too, it's really important for clients to ask a lot of questions. So it's really in the questions that you learn what people still need to learn more about. And it's even from my own questions that I learn, like, okay, this is an area that I'm not as familiar with. And then what I end up doing, my personality is I just end up in a whole rabbit hole of research from one article to the next. And another thing I do and recommend is for people to join LinkedIn groups and to follow all of the trades on LinkedIn. And I kind of use that as my own personal newsfeed to keep up with the articles. And this is probably not the best strategy, but what I end up doing is I end up clicking on all the articles that I want to read. And then when it comes to my Friday morning reading time, I go back and read all those articles.
I think that is a very complicated aspect of our industry is that your inbox is constantly being flooded by all these newsletters that you sign up for. And quite frankly, you don't have time to read all of them at that moment, and or you want to sign up for other types of articles. But you have to have a system that can work for you, because ultimately you also have to do the work while you're continuing to educate yourself. So a spin-off of that question, what are some important ad tech topics that you really loved getting up to speed on as of late?
Yeah, one of my favorite things to read up on right now is the demise of cookies. And the reason why it interests me so much is because as consumers are becoming more savvy and understanding what type of data is being collected about them, they're responding to that, rightfully so. And another area that I become naturally more gravitated towards is connected TV. And I think that's just because I watch a lot of TV. So I think it's just really interesting to read about what the advertising opportunities are going to be. How will we better track people in that realm so that we can advertise and send better messaging to them? And lastly, I think the behavior changes during the pandemic have been really interesting to read about too. Just because I like to see, am I in line with these behavior changes that the trades are talking about? And the answer is yes, I am.
How do you see client education in the programmatic realm continuing to evolve into the future?
It's funny because if you were to ask me this question pre-pandemic, I was generally not a fan of the virtual version, mainly because I don't personally love joining things virtually, and it's really hard to keep your attention in a virtual environment. I'm very aware of that. But now that the pandemic has hit, I think it has almost shifted people's mindset. The virtual version will always be available with a combination of what I call live short form content. So people to directly dial into Zoom, see someone there that they can engage with, ask questions with. And then I think there's going to be what I think of as long form versions of the virtual experience, where you can do that at your own pace, where you can log in whenever you have time. And then I also think there's going to be a virtual version of what we call micro learning. So with very short interactive e-learnings on topics that you can learn quickly in maybe 5 to 10 minutes. I also, though, think that there's something to be said about in-person experiences, and I don't think that virtual will completely replace the in-person experience when it comes to education. I do think that if most people were given a choice and if they could, they would still attend the in-person setting. And, education is really much more about just hearing someone speak, but it's also getting to know your team and getting to know the subject matter experts and others that work in the same industry and getting to know them in person and networking. So I think there's a component of that, necessarily cannot be replicated completely in the virtual world, but I think it's always going to be a combination of these two.
I love those observations, Christine. And I agree with you that although we've been living in this world in which we have leaned heavily upon virtual experiences, that we are not as humans going to just gravitate entirely away from the in-person experience. I think there is also an accountability element. I think there's a FOMO element. I think people do like to see people in person. They're probably looking forward to seeing people in person again, but that there's going to be more of both. And frankly, this has been, if anything, if we're going to see the sunny side of it, a good exercise in being able to refine the virtual experiences that we bring to clients. And I know you've done a ton of it and you've done it very successfully. So, Christine, I appreciate you making time to have this conversation and talk to us about education around the ad tech space and programmatic media.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Nora. This has been my pleasure.
Thanks again to Christine Kim, lead of AdTech Client Education Program, Centro Certified. We appreciate all the thoughts today on how to stay up to speed, Christine. If you want to learn more about Christine's client education programs, you can do so by visiting centro.net/institute. That's it for this episode. As always, I'm your host, Noor Nasir. We'll see you next time for more AdTech Unfiltered.